Back to the Future is the ultimate time travel adventure, a film that turned a DeLorean and a mad scientist into two of the most iconic images in cinema. But the version you saw in theaters was almost a completely different movie. Did you know the original ending didn't use the clock tower at all, but a nuclear bomb detonating in the Nevada desert? Or that a secret code from Stanley Kubrick's films is hiding in plain sight on Doc Brown's amplifier? Today, we're uncovering 16 hidden truths about Back to the Future 1985, including shocking Easter eggs that reveal a secret connection to the Indiana Jones movies. Number 1. The scrapped alternate ending. The climax of Back to the Future is one of the most iconic sequences in cinema. Doc Brown races to connect a cable to the clock tower while Marty guns the DeLorean down the street. Lightning strikes and he's sent home. But in the original 1981 screenplay, none of that existed. In that first draft, the time machine wasn't even a DeLorean. It was a device built into a lead-lined refrigerator. And instead of harnessing lightning, Marty had to drive that refrigerator to a nuclear bomb test site in the Nevada desert and climb inside, using the energy of an atomic explosion to travel back to the future. The entire sequence was fully storyboarded and ready to shoot, but Universal demanded $1 million in budget cuts, and building a replica nuclear test town on location was the single most expensive element in the script. So writers Bob Gale and Robert Zemeckis scrapped the nuclear ending and replaced it with the clock tower sequence, which could be filmed entirely on the existing Universal backlot. That one budget cut gave us one of the greatest climaxes in movie history, and the nuclear fridge idea didn't die. Producer Steven Spielberg held on to the concept for over 2 decades and eventually used it for the opening of Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. The refrigerator that almost ended Back to the Future became one of the most talked about scenes in a completely different franchise. Number 2. The Kubrick code on the amplifier. In the opening scene, Marty plugs his guitar into Doc Brown's massive amplifier. Most viewers focus on the blast that sends Marty flying across the room. But if you look closely at the amp, you'll notice a label that reads CRM 114. That's not a random serial number. It's a direct reference to legendary director Stanley Kubrick, who used CRM 114 as a recurring code across his films. It first appeared in Dr. Strangelove as the CRM 114 discriminator, a military radio device that helps explain why the bomber crew cannot receive the recall order. Kubrick later echoed the code in A Clockwork Orange as Serum 114, the drug used during Alex's disturbing Ludovico treatment. By placing it on Doc's amp, the filmmakers quietly turned Back to the Future's opening scene into a small salute to Kubrick. Number 3. The time travel date that appeared twice. Writer Bob Gale chose November 5 as the date when Doc Brown envisioned the flux capacitor, making it one of the most important dates in the entire film. Gale picked it for a personal reason. November 5 is his own father's birthday, the same father whose high school yearbook inspired the whole movie. But there's another layer to that date. In the 1979 film Time After Time, where H.G. Wells builds a time machine and chases Jack the Ripper into the future, the very first time travel also takes place on November 5 at the exact same time of day. Many believe this was an intentional homage by the Back to the Future team to one of the genre's most important predecessors. The most famous date in time travel cinema was used twice, 6 years apart. Number 4. Was Doc Brown trying to die? One of the most widely discussed fan theories about Back to the Future centers on a scene every viewer remembers. At the Twin Pines Mall, Doc Brown tests the DeLorean for the first time by sending his dog Einstein into the future. As the car races toward him at 88 miles per hour, Doc stands directly in its path. He doesn't move. The theory argues that Doc was attempting suicide. Just moments earlier, he'd lamented that none of his inventions had ever worked. If the time machine failed like everything else, the DeLorean would simply run him over and kill him. When it unexpectedly succeeded, Doc rediscovered his will to live, only to be shot by the Libyans moments later. Actor Christopher Lloyd, who played Doc, was asked about this theory directly in a 2018 interview. He rejected it, saying Doc had so much confidence in what he was doing, he didn't worry about that. Whether you accept Lloyd's answer or not, the theory has become one of the most debated interpretations in all of 1980s cinema. Number 5. The actress who lost her role over 2 inches. When Eric Stoltz was fired as Marty McFly and replaced by Michael J. Fox, there was a second casualty that nobody talks about. Actress Melora Hardin, who would later become famous as John Levinson on The Office, had already been cast as Marty's girlfriend Jennifer Parker on a 2-film contract. She'd done wardrobe fittings, she was ready to go, but Fox stood 5'4", and Hardin was noticeably taller. The production crew was polled about whether the height difference would be a problem. The women on the crew overwhelmingly felt that audiences wouldn't believe the tall, pretty girl would pick the shorter guy. So at 17 years old, Hardin lost a 2-film franchise role because her co-star got 2 inches shorter. She was replaced by Claudia Wells, who stood 5'3½". Hardin later called the experience crushing, and Fox later wrote in his memoir that no one ever asked for his opinion on the matter. Had they, he says he would have stood up for Hardin and argued to keep her in the role. Number 6. The Coca-Cola time machine. Before plutonium, before the flux capacitor, and before the DeLorean, the time machine ran on something even stranger. Actor John Cryer, who auditioned for the role of Marty McFly, later posted a thread on Twitter recalling the early draft script he read for his audition. In that version, the time machine needed nuclear fission and one secret ingredient to work. That secret ingredient turned out to be Coca-Cola. This was from one of the very earliest drafts, long before the writers settled on plutonium, stolen from Libyan terrorists. It's a reminder that the most iconic time machine in movie history went through dozens of rewrites, and at one point, the key to time travel was a can of soda. Number 7. The lie on every VHS copy. If you grew up watching Back to the Future on VHS, you probably remember the words "to be continued" appearing after Doc returns from the future in the final scene. You might even believe the filmmakers always planned a sequel. They didn't. Director Robert Zemeckis and writer Bob Gale intended Doc's return as a fun joke ending, a final laugh, not a cliffhanger. The "to be continued" text was added only to VHS releases to help promote Back to the Future Part 2. It was never in the theatrical cut, and it was later removed again for the DVD release. But by then, an entire generation of viewers was convinced those words had always been there. It's one of the most successful pieces of retroactive marketing in film history, and it quietly rewrote millions of people's memories of a movie they thought they knew by heart. Number 8. The movie poster that tells a secret. When Marty arrives back in 1985, near the end of the film, there's a brief shot of the town theater marquee. The movie playing is The Atomic Kid, a 1954 Mickey Rooney comedy. Most viewers glance right past it, but that title isn't random. In the earlier drafts of the script, where Marty had to reach a nuclear test site to get home, it was seeing this specific movie at the theater that gave Marty the idea to use a nuclear explosion. When the writers replaced the nuclear ending with the clock tower, they kept the Atomic Kid on the marquee as a deliberate nod to the storyline they abandoned. It's a ghost of a completely different version of Back to the Future, still visible on screen for anyone paying close enough attention. Number 9. The name that wasn't in the script. Near the end of the film, Marty returns to 1985 and stumbles across a homeless man sleeping on a bench. He excitedly calls out "Red," as if he recognizes the guy. Fans have spent decades speculating about who Red actually is. The most popular theory is that he's the same person as Red Thomas, whose name appears on campaign posters in 1955 as the mayor of Hill Valley. If true, it would mean the former mayor of Hill Valley ended up homeless, one of the most tragic implications in the entire film. But here's the thing, the name Red was never in the script. It was completely ad-libbed by Michael J. Fox on set. Writer Bob Gale has confirmed that Fox made up the name on the spot, and it was never intended as a connection to Mayor Red Thomas. One improvised word spoken in a single take created one of the longest-running mysteries in Back to the Future fandom. Number 10. The voice that isn't Michael J. Fox. The Johnny B. Goode scene at the Enchantment Under the Sea dance is one of the most iconic musical performances in film history. Marty slides across the stage, channels Chuck Berry's one-legged hop, does Pete Townshend's windmill arm swing, and plays behind his head like Stevie Ray Vaughan. Fox performed all the guitar choreography himself, but there's one detail most fans don't realize: the singing voice isn't his. The vocals were performed by musician Mark Campbell, who went completely uncredited. The filmmakers deliberately chose not to credit Campbell because they wanted audiences to believe Fox was actually singing. Every note you hear coming from Marty's mouth belongs to someone else. Number 11. Does George McFly know the truth? Here's the biggest question fans have debated for 4 decades. When Marty returns to the improved 1985, his parents are happy, successful, and seem strangely at ease with their son. But should George McFly have recognized him? Think about it. In 1955, a teenager appeared out of nowhere and spent one extraordinary week in George's life. He used terms like Darth Vader and Planet Vulcan years before Star Wars or Star Trek existed. He orchestrated the moment George found his courage, brought George and Lorraine together, and then vanished. 30 years later, George's own son grows up to look exactly like that teenager. Fans point to the cover of George's novel, which depicts their exact encounter, a figure in a radiation suit bringing a boy and a girl together. They also note that George repeats Marty's own advice back to him: if you put your mind to it, you can accomplish anything. The original first draft of the screenplay actually ended at exactly this moment, with George seeing a photograph of Marty from 1955 and beginning to realize who Calvin Klein really was. But that ending was cut, and co-writer Bob Gale has officially debunked the theory. After 30 years with no photo reference, Gale says, "You just have a hazy recollection." But not every fan is convinced, and honestly, that ambiguity might be the most brilliant thing about the entire film. Number 14. Huey Lewis judging his own song. Musician Huey Lewis contributed 2 iconic songs to Back to the Future, The Power of Love and Back in Time. But Lewis also appears in the film itself, and most viewers have no idea. He plays the stern, bespectacled judge who rejects Marty's band at the Battle of the Bands audition. The irony is that Marty's band is performing Lewis's own song when they get rejected. Lewis initially refused the cameo, but agreed on one condition: he had to be completely disguised and uncredited. The production team fitted him with horn-rimmed glasses, a suit, and a nerdy demeanor, the complete opposite of his rock star persona. While filming, Lewis joked, "MTV can't see this or I'm finished." An earlier draft of the script even included a line where Marty would respond, "What do you want, Huey Lewis?" but it was cut for being too obvious. So the man who defined the film's sound is hiding in plain sight, rejecting his own music, and most audiences have never noticed. Number 12. The chimp that almost changed everything. In early drafts of the script, Doc Brown wasn't called Doc at all. He was Professor Brown, and Marty addressed him as Profau, and his companion wasn't a dog named Einstein. It was a chimpanzee named Chimp. When Universal Studios president Sid Sheinberg read the script, he demanded the chimp be removed, declaring that no movie with a chimpanzee in it had ever made a profit. Writer Bob Gale pushed back, citing the massive box office success of Every Which Way But Loose. Sheinberg fired right back. That was an orangutan in those movies. Sheinberg won the argument. Chimp the chimp became Einstein the dog, Professor became Doc, and while he was at it, Sheinberg also changed the mother's name from Meg to Lorraine, naming her after his own wife, actress Lorraine Gary. One studio executive's opinions quietly reshaped 3 of the film's most recognizable characters. Number 13. George McFly, Middleweight Champion. In the finished film, when Marty returns to the improved 1985, his father George McFly has become a successful science fiction author. His novel, A Match Made in Space, was directly inspired by his encounter with Marty, who disguised as Darth Vader in 1955. But in the first draft screenplay, George's transformation went in a completely different direction. That early draft didn't include the Darth Vader scene at all, so George never got the sci-fi inspiration. Instead, the act of punching Biff Tannen at the school dance sent George down a different path entirely. In the original ending, George McFly was the middleweight boxing champion of the world, having fought at Madison Square Garden. The writers eventually realized that finding validation through violence didn't match George's gentle, dreamy personality. A career in science fiction better reflected who he was, and it turned out to be the right call, because the cover of George's novel in the finished film, which shows a figure in a radiation suit bringing a boy and girl together, became one of the cleverest visual details in the entire movie. Number 15. Eddie Van Halen's secret performance. During the Darth Vader from Planet Vulcan scene, Marty puts headphones on a sleeping George McFly and blasts a loud, aggressive guitar riff to terrorize him awake. That riff sounds raw and intense because it was performed by one of the greatest guitarists who ever lived. The filmmakers originally wanted to use music from Van Halen, the band, but the group as a whole refused to participate. So guitarist Eddie Van Halen recorded the riff on his own, without the rest of the band, and without any screen credit. One of rock's most legendary musicians contributed to one of the decade's biggest films, and for decades almost nobody knew his fingerprints were on it. Number 16. Doc Brown's Forbidden Discovery. In the finished film, Marty arrives in 1955 and uses a handheld hairdryer as a fake weapon during his Darth Vader disguise to terrify George McFly into asking Lorraine to the dance. But the movie never explains where Marty got that hairdryer. The answer was in a deleted scene. In the scene, which was filmed but cut after a test screening in San Jose, the 1955 Doc Brown goes through a suitcase packed by his future 1985 self. He marvels at modern undergarments and the hairdryer, saying he was sure everyone in the future would be wearing disposable paper garments by 1985. Then he opens a copy of Playboy magazine to the centerfold and declares, "Suddenly the future's looking a whole lot better." The scene was cut because it slowed the pacing, but it solved a small continuity mystery and gave us one of the best Christopher Lloyd moments that audiences never got to see in theaters. Back to the Future wasn't just a movie about time travel. It was a movie about the terrifying, wonderful idea that the people who raised you were once just as lost and uncertain as you are right now. If you could go back and meet your parents as teenagers, do you think you'd actually like them? Drop your answer in the comments.